and welcome to Off the Charts, the Sports Info Solutions football podcast. I'm Mark Simon, joined by SIS Vice President of Football and Research, Matt Manocherian. We're less than a month away from the NFL draft. The Jaguars are on the clock to take Trevor Lawrence number 1 on April 29th. But the rest of the draft, there's lots of questions to be answered. And in the next few weeks, we'll answer them here. The 2021 Football Rookie Handbook on sale now, actisports.com, amazon.com as well. Matt was the lead editor on the project, so let's dive right in. If I had asked you on April 1st, 2020, what's the most surprising thing that's going to be in the 2021 book, what would it be?
Two things that absolutely shocked me as we were putting this book together and rounding things out. You know, the scouting process is not me sitting there and just putting grades on all these players. We have this full process where it comes up the ladder, goes through our scouting directors, Nathan Cooper and John Todd. And last year, if you had told me that Jamar Chase wouldn't be our number 1 receiver and or that Travis Etienne would not be our number 1 running back, I would have been absolutely shocked. I just felt so sure based on all of the numbers that we had on them last year, all of my impression of watching them as I was watching other players. You know, you're watching Joe Burrow, you get a sense of Jamar Chase and who he is. It's just really shocking to me, given how high we were on those guys at the time. And to be honest with you, a shortened 2020 season that maybe we shouldn't be putting so much stock in. I don't know how Jamar Chase without playing drops down, other than that Jalen Waddle just was an absolute freak show when he was on the field this year. And he's got speed that's so elite. You know, Nate and John, when they came to me and they said, we think that this is the number 1 player, I had a hard time arguing with them. So if it was me on the clock, I might still be going Jamar Chase. I'd have a hard time not listening to my sort of scouting lieutenants there. That one really surprised me because he's a bulletproof prospect in a lot of ways. Etienne, it makes a little more sense when you break it down. Like, you could have seen questions about his ability to pass protect and contribute in the pass game in general last year. But with him, I think it's just more Najee Harris is a well-rounded, very good running back. And Javonte Williams really just stepped up his game this past year. A lot of good players from that North Carolina offense, and his ability to pass protect, his ability to break tackles, they are traits that make him a better projection than a running back like Travis Etienne, even though Etienne can change angles as far as with his speed as a ball carrier. So I was so in love with both of these players last year. I thought they were easy top picks for me. I still love these players in a lot of ways, but them not being number 1 at their respective positions, definitely, I wouldn't have been able to see that coming.
So let me just go back to Chase for a second. Isn't it possible that a lot of NFL teams probably still have him as their number 1?
Oh yeah, I think the consensus right now is that Chase still is the number 1. I think the season ended and everybody thought Devontae Smith had cemented his number 3 pick status. I think that was the narrative after the national title game, and you could understand why. But I think in actual NFL circles, it was always probably Jamar Chase that was in that pole position. And I think you really got to pick your flavor in terms of if you're going to be which of these 3 guys you're going to rank the highest. It's not that one of them is so much better or worse than the other ones. I think that, you might like Rocky Road and I might like chocolate chip mint, whatever. It's that sort of a situation. They're all just so good. It's do you want the Tyreek Hill type or do you want sort of the AJ Green type? I don't even know who the best comps are. I'm just making up names off the top of my head right now. But each of these guys kind of has a little bit of a different style to them that might be as impactful for how you rank them as anything else.
Personal preference, likely from the NFL GMs and from their personnel and scouting folks. All right, so we're going to talk a bunch of things today. 49ers trade up with the Dolphins. Miami then makes a slick maneuver and trades back up with the Eagles. What do the Falcons do at 4? We'll talk value. Penei Sewell, Rashawn Slater. We'll touch on the Panthers. Jalen Mayfield, what do we make of him? Lots to get to. But first, hey, Matt, what football scouting philosophies inspired the Football Rookie Handbook?
Yeah, well, as you know, my background was with the Saints and with the Browns, where I spent time with both of those teams in their scouting departments. With the Saints, we were very traditional, kind of round-based grading. This guy's a 3rd rounder, this guy's a 7th rounder. But the role-based grading is really what has inspired the Football Rookie Handbook, the sort of quote-unquote Patriots way. What we really look to do, and you get a sense of this right when you dive into the book, is fit the players into what role they're going to fill on the NFL level. And it's really my belief, it's our belief here at Sports Info Solutions that this is a better way to understand what these prospects are. You're trying to fit them into your team and build your team. You're not just trying to put ground round grades and rankings just for the fun of it. It's not fantasy football, so to speak. So it's that role-based grading philosophy that's really grounded in a lot of things that go back from Mike Lombardi, Bill Belichick, Bill Parcells' sort of involvement in the philosophies that underlie of what goes on. And then in terms of modern, what we really try to do, and there is a desire, people ask all the time, when you put the scouting and the analytics together, what's the final ranking? And we really shy away from that in the Football Rookie Handbook because we try to keep those separate perspectives. When you look at NFL teams and the way things are kind of organized right now, there's a separation between the analytics, whether that's the numbers that people are producing on the field, which we tend to use, or combine pro day type numbers, which are also important. But the scouting reports, we try to keep that independent so that one, we can get an independent evaluation. What do the scouts think? What do the analytics think? Now, where they agree, that's where I get excited. Where they disagree, that's where we got to dig in a little bit more. But then on top of that, kind of the next level thing is using the scouting as data points within the analytics. And that's something that we're working on kind of behind the scenes in the R&D department here. Doesn't make it into the Football Rookie Handbook, at least not yet. But in terms of being able to keep the scouting separate from the analytics, I think there's sort of less covariance when you talk about trying to boil down what the scouting grades mean within the context of the analytics if we keep that separate. So those are a couple of the important things that I think give an idea of where we're coming from when we do this. We're not your typical fan, ESPN, traditional media. This is, and that's not to criticize any of those things. This is to say we're looking at this really from a team building standpoint, and we're trying to be as rigorous as possible when we think about keeping the analytics and the scouting really siloed from one another, even within the book.
All right, I'm sitting at home, especially if I'm a fan of a top 10 team. I know my team has multiple needs, and our book will tell you exactly what those needs are. But boy, there's someone good on the board. This maybe foreshadows a question that's coming up, but how should we look at need-based drafting versus best player approach?
I mean, for me, this is my background. Everything that I've learned has been best player available. Everything I've learned from every scout that I ever came across that I thought really knew what they were talking about, the GMs, the coaches that I learned under, it's got to be best player available. Anybody that looks at best player available versus need-based drafting and they say, this is a balancing act. This is something that's like somebody that tells you need balance between the number of pass plays you run and the number of run plays you run. It's garbage. Balance is not balance. Balance is not 50-50 when it comes to run pass rate, and balance is not balance when it comes to need-based versus best place available. Yeah, we had Drew Brees in New Orleans, so we weren't looking for a quarterback very often when I was there 5-10 years ago. That goes without saying. But in terms of just closing your eyes and saying you're not going to look at a quarterback, that's absolutely the wrong philosophy. You'll have people like Mike Holmgren who would say you draft a quarterback every single year, even if you got one. And then the other side of it is when you get into these need situations and you start talking yourself into players because they fit needs for you, that's how you make mistakes. It's really easy to say, ooh, yeah, we have a need at tight end. Let's try to figure out the guy that's going to make that position whole for us. But take this year's draft, for example. If you need a tight end and you can get Kyle Pitts, great. Kyle Pitts is probably going to be the best player available when you pick, if he's on the board when you pick, because he's that good. But if you're going to drop down for a Pat Freiermuth, you might be making him into something that he's not because he fits that role. And I'm not trying to, again, I don't want to hate on him as a player. We've got a strong grade on Freiermuth. I could see him becoming a strong starter level player in the NFL. But if you're looking for him to do what Kyle Pitts is going to do for a team, then you're creating something that's not actually there. So I think need-based drafting is a really good way to get in the way of all of the work that we should be doing in terms of stacking the board, realizing that injuries happen in football. You're always an injury away from having another need on your team. You've got to get the best players, and we're not good enough at drafting to be able to sacrifice the amount that comes in with need-based players, right? If I have one player that I like better than another player, but he's not a quote-unquote need for me, so I pass on him, I'm undermining my draft board. So for all of those reasons, I'm best player available almost to a fault.
I would say that holds true over every sport. Injuries happen, things happen, depth necessary. All right. Again, this kind of foreshadows what we're going to talk about with the 49ers, I think, in a second. But how does positional value fit into all this?
So we talked about the vertical stack of players, from the highest grade to the lowest grade, but also the horizontal stack, how we look across positions. And one thing that's true every year is quarterbacks are going to go off the board early. any quarterbacks that you've got in those squares on your draft matrix where you're talking about starting level players, especially within the first 2 years of their career, those quarterbacks are coming off the board early. We see there are 5 guys. There are a lot of guys with that strong grade this year, but I wouldn't feel very comfortable if I'm a quarterback needy team waiting and not getting any of those 5 guys and then being stuck with what's left, because I do think there is a drop off this year. So I say that this year, but I say in general, positional value, quarterback is just a totally separate thing from everything else. I believe in building up front first on offense and defense, but the quarterback comes before whatever you want to prioritize first. It is that important. It is that different a position. It is that special a role within your franchise that you've got to do everything you can to get that first. So when you look at the positional grading across positions, forget about quarterbacks. They've got to come first. The other positions that I'll talk about in terms of positional grading are running back and wide receiver, because opposite of quarterbacks, these guys are going to exist. Now, you're not going to have Jamar Chase existing on day 3 of the draft. You're not going to have Travis Etienne on day 3 of the draft, but you will have running backs that can be reasonable NFL players, that can be sufficient starters, backups, guys that can play for you, guys that can fill roles on your team. And when you have the fact that just there are a lot of athletes that are running back type of athletes, your 5'11", 220-pound guy that can run 4.5, or even your wide receiver athletes, right? Your maybe 6 foot, 200-pound guy that can run in the 4.4 range. These guys exist a lot more than offensive tackles, right? 300-pound dancing bears. These guys exist a lot more than edge rushers, where you see, last year you get a Chase Young. You don't have a Chase Young in this year's draft. Those guys don't come around every season. Long story short, positionally, we try to calibrate our scales so that it works out when you look at the grades across positions, so that generally when you look at a guy who's graded at a 6.7 at tight end, like I mentioned, Freiermuth, you can know that he stacks about similarly to the way that we see a safety that I wrote up, Javon Holland from Oregon, who we'll talk about. He grades at a 6.7 in safety. But what that tells you is that the value for each of those players is about the same. We see those both as starters for us at similar value positions. The running backs and the wide receivers, those guys are going to exist. So we try to stay away from them a little bit more early in terms of positional value. And the quarterbacks, you better get them early or else you're not going to get a chance at them at all. So they go a little bit above the player value. So Penei Sewell is a 7.2 grade. Trevor Lawrence is a 7.2 grade. Those are guys tied for the top grade in the Football Rookie Handbook. But make no mistake, Trevor Lawrence is the top graded player. And even though there are players less than a 7.2, I still probably put Justin Fields ahead of a Penei Sewell just because of that positional value that a 6.9 Justin Fields at quarterback brings you there. That's a great grade for a quarterback. That would be a number 1 player in a lot of years. So sum it all up, positional value, quarterbacks are special. Receivers and running backs, as much as we love those positions, we can kind of wait on them a little bit more. And then I throw everybody else kind of into a similar bucket, with the obvious, caveats being that at every position, I want guys that can impact the pass game more than that can impact the run game.
I feel like everything that you've brought up in the last 5 to 10 minutes leads us to this very question. So by now you know about the 49ers, the Dolphins, and the Eagles, and the trades from about a week ago. Dolphins trade the 3 to the 49ers. They get back the 12, a 1, and a 3 in 2022, and a 1 in 2023. They then trade the 12 and other picks, including a 2022 first rounder, to the Eagles to get back to 6, and they get 156 as well. It's secondary to this. In the end, for the short term, we get the 49ers at 3, the Dolphins at 6, the Eagles at 12. For the longer term, the Dolphins get some future picks. They get back to 6, or they might get who they wanted all along anyway. The Eagles get an extra 1. And then we get some cryptic tweets saying that the 49ers were doing this all for Mac Jones. Who is the 49ers, Dolphins, Eagles trade winner?
Well, I think there's no doubt about it. When you get the trade downs involved, more often than not, we're going to grade those trades as winners. Now, we like to say in analytics community, trade down, trade down, trade down. We have to be realistic. When you're inside the draft room, it's not that everybody's looking to trade up all the time and you have the opportunities to trade down. But when the trade goes down and you see the Eagles pick up a first round draft pick, you see the Dolphins pick up a first round draft pick in the context of this, those teams are both the winners to me. I've heard people say, the Dolphins, by moving back up, you should separate these two moves. They gained 2 first round picks and then they lost a first round pick. If you want to separate those out, fine, you can nitpick there. But I think what they did is they moved from a spot at number 3 where they were going to be choosing between Jamar Chase, Kyle Pitts, Jalen Waddle type players. Now they move down to number 6. I think they're choosing from amongst the same players. Whereas if they went to that number 12 spot, I think you're talking about going from one tier to another within the draft. I think the quarterbacks, the 4 receivers, I'll include Pitts as a receiver in there, and Penei Sewell are just a tier above the rest of the players in the draft. And so at 12, you're risking dropping a tier there. So I think that's what the Dolphins did. I think they're winners. I think the Eagles are winners. And, even though I don't like moving up, I don't like giving away first round picks. When you look at the 49ers and the way that their team is shaping up right now, they've added 2 veteran offensive linemen this offseason, right? Strengthening up the left tackle, the center. We know how they like to attack teams. They're one of the most injured teams in the NFL last year, getting back to full strength. And it's, Kyle Shanahan will say what he wants, but he clearly wanted to get somebody to fill that quarterback hole. He wants one of these guys in that top 3. And if he moved up to get Justin Fields, who I absolutely love, then I think that's a home run move for the Niners as well, even though as an analyst, I'm contractually obligated to criticize teams for moving up.
What about Mac Jones in this?
Well, that's the interesting thing. I saw the move come out. I immediately texted you, Mark, and I said, get on the Twitter. You got to show my report on Justin Fields from the Football Rookie Handbook, where I literally said he would fit best in a Shanahan style scheme, right? The wide zone stuff that they love to do with the play action bootlegs. It's enticing to think about Justin Fields in such a quarterback friendly offense, having a lot of the reads simplified for him and getting the ability to get him on the move, making different throws from different angles. And then if things aren't there, for him to be able to run the ball early in his career and bring that sort of RG3 element to that offense. I was absolutely in love with it. And I thought that's where they were going right away. And I'm still not convinced that that's not where they're going, but there's a lot of smoke from whether it's the Orlovskis of the world, who I think people are killing him, but I think we're killing the messenger when we kill Orlovsky. He's repeating what he's hearing from teams about Justin Fields' work ethic. And that might be a question with him. I doubt it. I'm not in those facilities anymore, so I can't say for myself. And then you get Chris Sims, who's got matching tattoos with Kyle Shanahan, saying that it's going to be Mac Jones. There's a lot of smoke around that. So it doesn't make sense to me. I don't see Mac Jones as a significant upgrade there. But for all that said, what am I going to tell Kyle Shanahan? He doesn't know what he's doing as far as quarterbacks go. It's a tough argument to make. I mean, it didn't work out with Jimmy G. Really, they made it to the Super Bowl, but then he's disappointed and he's moving on from him. So I don't know. I don't know if you call that a win or a loss. The Mac Jones thing, I think there's a lot of smoke there. I could also see the fit. He does not bring the element of movement that Justin Fields brings. But when you look in the analytics side of the Football Rookie Handbook, Mac Jones in his one real season this past year, just absolutely off the charts in every way. The accuracy, the ability to get the ball out of his hands quickly, what they did offensively, his independent quarterback rating under pressure just outpaced the field. So even though he's kind of a statue back there, it wasn't something that affected his play when we saw that in 2020. So there's a lot to like about Mac Jones. There's a lot to not like about him. I don't think anybody's out there saying that they're going to draft him at number 3 because he is a good athlete. I think we all agree about what he is. I wouldn't like him at all if he was going to a team like the Carolina Panthers. I don't understand how Mac Jones is an upgrade over Teddy Bridgewater at all when you look across the different traits. But when you look at Kyle Shanahan, who's thirsty for a new quarterback, if that's his guy, I'm not going to bet against Mac Jones succeeding.
So you've got quarterback at 1, quarterback at 2, quarterback at 3. Where do the Falcons go at 4?
This is a fun spot to be in for Terry Fontenot. We've talked about how Ryan Pace was one of my old bosses in New Orleans, obviously the Bears GM. Terry Fontenot, another guy I worked with in New Orleans, has been with that team continuously. A true, like Ryan, he's a true scout. He came up from that side of things, really, really understands the pro scouting side of things. That's his specialty. But I know he's got great people on as well. DeJuan Jones, another guy from New Orleans, has followed him to the Falcons, and I know he'll be playing a large part in the college sort of operation there. And DeJuan, for what it's worth, was a big part of the Ravens drafting Lamar Jackson. So you can see the sort of foresight that these guys have. And these are some really, really good evaluators. I think Terry's got some choices. I think one choice he could make that can't go wrong is there are a lot of good players that are going to be right there at number 4. When you look at Kyle Pitts, that's juicy. That's enticing. You look at the wide receivers we talked about, that's enticing. You can say they don't really have the need for a tackle, but if they drafted a Penei Sewell, I think you can talk about bumping Caleb McGarry back inside like we thought that he was going to project to when he came out. And you can, I mean, you just don't want it. This is a 10-year left tackle that's going to be a bookend for you. You can't go wrong if you draft any of these super, super high talent players. I also think that if it's a Justin Fields there, if it is true that Kyle Shanahan moved up for a Mac Jones, oh man, a Justin Fields becomes interesting. And then not just for the Falcons, but I think that spot becomes interesting for other teams. I mentioned the Panthers and how I wouldn't be excited if they got Mac Jones. I would be excited if they got a Justin Fields or even a Trey Lance at that spot. I put Fields a kind of tier above just because we've seen him do it on a much higher level than we've seen what Trey Lance did. Trey Lance, all the athleticism is there, but the film is sparse on him. And when you look at what he did basically as a 19-year-old in low-level football, I'm less convinced than I am when it comes to Justin Fields. But you talk about the value there that the Falcons could also elect to move down at that spot if they were getting the right sort of offer there. I think that's also interesting. And hey, just for the fun of it, I mentioned Terry Fontenot. I mentioned Ryan Pace with the Bears. Any chance that the Bears could trade up and try to get a real quarterback? That would make John DeWan happy, right? The CEO of Sports Info Solutions, Bears fan who can't figure out why Andy Dalton is an upgrade over Mitch Trubisky, and I can't really help him with that. I don't know what sort of capital the Bears have to move up, but man, if they could get a real quarterback, they might actually have a real team. So maybe some former Saints trade possibilities there just to get some Chicago hopes up unnecessarily.
All right. So you can talk about a lot of things with this draft as we've done already. And we can talk risk, certainly a lot of unknowns with COVID causing havoc with the season. We can also talk value. Where's the value at the top of the draft beyond what we've talked about, which is the quarterbacks and a couple of other guys that you've brought up?
It sort of reminds me of, was it the Cam Newton draft? Was that the same draft as AJ Green and Julio Jones? I think that was the one I'm remembering. You guys, the listeners can fact check me on this, but this reminds me of this sort of first round where, yeah, there are these quarterbacks and the quarterbacks are good, but these quarterbacks are also going to make some really good players available in the 6 through 10 range that you might not see in a typical year. So even though we're coming off of 2020 and the depth in the draft altogether, when we get to day 3 and undrafted is not going to be there because there aren't the same number of players that are drafted that have entered into the draft this year. A lot of players are going back to school. The top end, we did not see that at all. We see some really good top end. Everybody knows about the quarterbacks, but when you talk about the 3 receivers that we said, Jalen Waddle, Jamar Chase, Devontae Smith, we're talking about Devontae Smith possibly being available at the bottom half of the top 10 or even into the 11 to 15 range. That's incredible value right there. You talk about a Kyle Pitts. I don't care what number you draft him at. He's the sort of player that is so different, such a difference maker at his position. With tight ends, we talk about mismatch ability. That's the key word when it comes to all of our scout school stuff. Yeah, we want guys that can play the Y. We want guys that can play more of the H-back type role. We want guys that are intelligent. Tight end is the most important position for intelligence outside of quarterback on the team because they have to learn the route concepts with the receivers. They have to learn the blocking schemes with the offensive linemen for a real run game. And they have to learn the blocking schemes with the offensive linemen for the pass game. So they've got to know all of those elements just like the quarterback does. It's really important to have intelligence there, but above all else, mismatch ability is where it's at when it comes to tight ends. Because if you have a Kyle Pitts, we are dictating to you as a defense that you are screwed no matter what personnel you put on the field, right? We love to talk about things in terms of 11 personnel, 12 personnel, 21 personnel. I see a new chart on Twitter once a week that comes out with the EPA for different splits. And I think all of that kind of stuff is wonderful. But what's really important is when you have 11 personnel and your tight end in that 11 personnel is Kyle Pitts, then all of a sudden, what do? How do you match up with that? Do you have to treat that like it's 4 wide receivers? Or what about when we're in 21 personnel? And again, that tight end is Kyle Pitts. all of a sudden, are we going to go big? Are we going to try to fight this 21 personnel, 2 running backs, 1 tight end, kind of old school 90s style football? Are we going to try to match that up with 3 linebackers? Good luck finding somebody to cover Kyle Pitts. So the mismatch ability, the ability where you can split him out, you can line him up literally at the X, you can line him up at the Y, you can put him wherever you want offensively, and he's going to create an issue for the defense the second he's involved in the personnel package. Every personnel package gets better. Your 21 gets better, your 11 gets better, your 12 gets better. Every single personnel package changes because of Kyle Pitts and what he does in terms of you can't match up with him. So I absolutely love him in terms of the value. We talked Penei Sewell already, tied for Trevor Lawrence with the top numerical grade in the book. Enough said there. You can slide him into really any offensive line position. I wouldn't use him at center, but I don't see any reason why you can't. He's that kind of an athlete, recruited at Oregon to play guard. So if you wanted to slide him inside, I don't think that's the best use of the value, but you can do it. After those 5, along with those top 3 quarterbacks, I do think that there's a little bit of a drop off there. And then in that next level, you look at those next 2 quarterbacks, your Trey Lance and your Mac Jones. Sounds like they're going to be off the board already regardless, which is why I talk about value falling, right? Every time you're a non-quarterback needy team and you see quarterback go off the board before you pick, that's one more guy for you to choose from. So you love to see that. The 2 guys that I put in the next tier for me, though, Patrick Surtain Jr., he's borderline that first tier for me. We've got a 7.0 final grade on him, and I think he could absolutely be an all-pro player sooner rather than later. So he's another guy I'd put in that top tier, and he's the top defensive player, the first defensive player that I've mentioned so far. Rashawn Slater out of Northwestern. In terms of the offensive tackle class, he's not on the Penei Sewell level, but this is a guy that is, again, going to be a left tackle, starting level left tackle for you. You see the intelligence, you see the technique, the hands, the feet, the savvy. He can play left tackle for you. He can play right tackle for you. Just a really good guy, really good body control. I think at either of those positions, you'd be excited for what he can do, especially as a pass blocker for you. Again, now Slater, not a guy that I think is going to be as flexible to move inside on the NFL level. I like him better on the outside as far as that stuff goes. But whether it's right tackle, left tackle, those are the next 2 players that I look at. And then it sort of starts to level out and we start to get into the rest of the draft.
You raved about Kyle Pitts for a good 60 to 90 seconds there. Is there a comp for him currently in the NFL?
No, I don't think there is. I don't think there's a Kyle Pitts in the NFL. I think you have to go back probably to, and maybe the prospect Vernon Davis. We remember the pro Vernon Davis, I think, pretty well. But the sort of athletic traits that Vernon Davis brought to the position, I think that's what Kyle Pitts is. And I can't really think of an example that's quite like that. I don't think Travis Kelce is necessarily what we're talking about in terms of like for like. I think Kelce was even more of like a fit as a wide receiver than Pitts was coming out. But certainly if Pitts can have any sort of career that's similar to a Kelce, I think he'd be ecstatic. I think the usage will be similar, but in terms of a player that he reminds me of, I probably have to go back a little bit further to find somebody with the sort of athletic profile that's as mismatchy as Kyle Pitts is.
All right, let's take a break. When we come back, we'll talk stats, we'll talk grading system, and we'll talk about what I was just saying about the unknowns, who's tough to evaluate this year. The 2021 SIS Football Rookie Handbook featuring scouting reports on more than 250 players entering the NFL in 2021. The handbook is a must-read for football fans. The book is written as if you, the reader, are one of the team's decision-makers. We capture every strength and weakness both through scouting and statistical analysis, and we've got the most detailed injury information in the scouting industry. The handbook also features essays on important football topics and provides an in-depth take from the perspective of every position on the field. New this year, it will be available on Kindle. To order the Football Rookie Handbook, go to www.actasports.com or wherever books are sold. All right, Matt, let's talk about evaluation challenges, and there are certainly plenty to choose from with everything that went on this past college football season. What are some players that are good examples of how difficult some of these evaluations could be, trying to figure out where a player is on the draft board?
Yeah, so one guy who I was the primary scout on in this year's book is Jalen Mayfield out of Michigan. Now, when you look at Jalen Mayfield, we wrote him as an offensive tackle. I could see him fitting as a right tackle or as a starter at either guard position on the NFL level. But when you look at him and you turn on the field, what I had to work with was in 2018, he played 3 games. 2019, he started all 13 games he played in. And then in 2020, just 2 games, combination of the late start and an injury and just not a lot of film of him out there. So we're talking about a guy, an offensive lineman, who a lot of times we see have 30 plus starts before they ever come to become draft prospects. We're going after 15 starts on this guy, just 2 within the last year. He's going to be drafted before he turns 21. He's not even 21 yet. And to be honest, I don't know what he's going to be when he finishes growing. I don't know if he's done growing physically, let alone as a player. So very difficult when you've got to go back. You've really got film of this guy in his first season as a starter to go off of, and then you get 2 games of him the following year. And to make things even more complicated, I thought I saw a big difference between what he was in 2019 and 2020. I thought he came along a big, long way from where he was. Now, again, it's just 2 games, but we didn't have him with a hold, with a false start, with a pressure allowed, with a blown block in the run game or the pass game. He didn't allow anything to get by him. When I look at him in terms of his total points rating, a 99 rating in the run game and a 98 rating in the pass game. But we go back to where we had a little bit more of the sample size, and you saw he graded out with that 94 in the pass game in 2019, but just an 81 in the run game. So again, we're going back and we're looking at things and we're trying to figure out, okay, what was he when we saw him with a little bit more exposure? And then where was he at when we saw him for the limited exposure this year? And where does that project for him to be? Right? It's one thing for us to understand what the player is right now, but the more of him that we see in college, think Mitchell Trubisky, who we didn't get enough of a baseline of what he was as a performer. So it was very difficult to figure out what he was going to be. A guy like Jalen Mayfield, that's part of the issue. Now, in terms of the player, in terms of what I did see and what I did write up, I saw a guy that's going to be a plus run blocker when he comes into the league. One of the big changes from 2019 to 2020 from the scouting perspective was strength. This guy has grown man strength that for a 20-year-old, frankly, projects to be quite scary. So I saw a guy that could have the type of strength and ability to be stout, hold the middle of the line, and create room in the run game that you'd be excited to have at either guard position. I also think he can move people as a tackle, and he has enough athleticism to be able to hang out on the outside. He's got plenty of length to go with things, and the upper body strength that I thought was really special. He's not a guy that needs to really bend his knees and gather himself in order to take on. He moves people with just his upper body. He throws dudes out of the club. In terms of what he is, there are a lot of physical traits that I really liked about him. I don't think that he's a finished product yet, and I think it'll take him some time to get used to dealing with other grown men on the NFL level. But he plays on his feet. You see him play with intelligence. You see him play with a nasty streak. I like the way he combos to the second level in the run game. And I think at the end of the day, he's a starting level NFL offensive lineman who's going to be a plus for a team that gets him. It's going to be a little bit of a work in progress to find out where that best fit is. And if the strength improvements that we saw in 2 games of 2020 were an aberration, or if that's going to continue to kind of project forward. And this can be, if that's the case, then all of a sudden we're talking about a real high ceiling prospect in terms of an offensive lineman. Mark, you think 2 games is hard. You should try 0 games. Because another guy that we could talk about is Javon Holland. Javon Holland out of Oregon. I know our producer, Justin Stein, is a big fan. He was telling me he's loved watching Holland for years back there. We saw 0 games of him in 2020, so it was even harder. I won't bore you with all of the different traits about him, but he's a guy who's got really nice athleticism. He's a guy that's been an intelligent player on the field for them, and it's resulted in interception production. He had 9 in his first 2 years at Oregon before opting out. But again, those interceptions were great. We also saw him give up plays in coverage. He was kind of a high risk, high reward type of defender. So is this something where the interception production, the intelligence that he showed, the ability to be in the right place at the right time, combined with his athleticism, projects to him being a special safety on the NFL level, like a honey badger type player, if it all comes together? Or is this a guy that was taking gambles? He was getting the gambles were paying off, but at the end of of the day, we didn't see him actually hang with anybody in man coverage when he didn't have the ability to gamble on those sort of things, in which case I get very nervous. That's not very Honey Badger-like at all. And there are some examples on the film where you look at him in man-to-man coverage and he does get beaten, especially over the top because of the level of aggressiveness that he played with. So 2 games was hard. 0 games this year was even harder. We had to go back to the true freshman and true sophomore film, and that film was good. And you see all kinds of things that are enticing in terms of upside there with Javon Holland. But at the same time, you also saw enough that it was, but I could also see how this doesn't work out too. So just the error bars are wider on all of these sorts of prospects at the end of the day, whether it's 2 games or 0 games in 2020, it's just going to increase the error bars so that we have to understand, yeah, maybe this guy's ceiling is even higher than the way that we're grading him, but there's also a chance that he's not going to pan out to where the grade is. And that's even as uncertain as the draft is every year. It's more so than ever. And I think those 2 players do a good job of showing why.
I'm picturing NFL draft coverage where someone that is expected to go on day 2 winds up going on day 1 in maybe the top 15, top 20, and certain teams feeling like they have a better handle on what you're talking about than certain other teams. All right. We try to make evaluations a little easier with thorough explanations of our stats and our grades. And I know Matt wanted to talk about 2 of them. So first of all, why is on target plus minus cooler than completion percentage over expectations?
Yeah, I see the analytics Twitter. They love CPOE, completion percentage over expectation. And what could be wrong with it? It's got next gen stats in it, and it's calculating the completion probability. And we can tell you that Tom Brady was 6% completion percentage points above average, which is obviously better than just looking at raw completion percentage. Yeah, that's cool. But John Shirley did something that I think is even cooler when it comes to on-target plus-minus. So on-target plus-minus takes a lot of similar inputs to expected completion percentage, that same next-gen model. We call it PComp when we do our version of it. This is something that Bryce Rossler put together more than a year ago as our lead developer on. Predicted completion percentage, instead of taking those charted data points, it takes into account what the pre-snap formation was. So what was the pre-snap alignment offensively? What's the pre-snap alignment defensively? What were the route combinations that were run? Was the quarterback pressured? And it gives you a completion probability based on that. So based on the route tree and the coverage, what's the completion probability as opposed to based on where all the dots coordinates are. And what we find on the NFL level, this has a 0.9 correlation with the next gen model. So it's telling us something very similar, but because we don't need the coordinate data to apply it to college football, we also have the ability to apply our model to college. Now that's PComp. In terms of on target plus minus, that's even cooler than that, because instead of looking at whether or not the pass was caught, which we know can be significantly impacted by receivers on the team and a lot of other factors, we're just looking at, was the throw on target? Did the throw hit the receiver either in stride or within the breadbasket, sort of an accurate throw that doesn't cause the receiver to adjust in order to make the catch? Was it on target? And then that's the CPOE aspect, plus minus. Was it on target more than we would expect or less than we would expect compared to an average, that throw done by an average player? So it gives us this additional layer of, 1, we can apply this to the college level, not the pro level. And 2, it's looking at on target, not just whether or not the throw was completed. It ends up making some interesting observations, because you'll see Justin Fields does really, really well in terms of PComp plus minus. In terms of his ability to complete passes, he was, I think, second. But when it came down to on target plus minus, he dropped down the list a little bit. Still very good, still amongst our leaders. But what that showed was that his receivers had caught amongst the highest percentage of catchable but off-target balls across the entire NCAA last year. So that's what led to that difference there. So this is another great example of, there's no one statistic that you can rely on that's just going to tell you everything that you need to know. But if I had to choose between CPOE and on target plus minus, I'm going on target because it's telling me a little bit more about what the quarterback can actually control.
Let's talk about our flagship stat, total points. It's an all-encompassing player stat that takes into account everything that happens on the field specific to his position. Now we have total points, and then we have total points rating. We talked about this in an earlier podcast, but we want to make sure that people are right on with this in terms of what it is. Let's avoid some confusion here. Explain the difference between the two.
Yeah, so total points has been around for a few years now. We applied it to college football for the last Football Rookie Handbook, and that was a big accomplishment because that allows us to see how many points each player was responsible for each season. Really cool. Boil everything down into one stat. Like I said, there's no perfect stat, but this is as close as we've gotten. The problem with that is, let's go back to Jalen Mayfield. I look at his 2020 and I see, oh, he got 9 total points, 5 in the run game and 4 in the pass game. Well, what does that really mean? He only played in 2 games in the whole season. So we need some context, especially in 2020, for how much you actually played and how much ability you had to actually create total points for your team. So that was kind of the impetus for putting together total points rating. And it does 2 things. It takes total points and puts it on a rate basis. So we go from just, okay, he had 9 total points to what does that mean if you only played in 2 games, and what should we have expected of you in there? And then it turns it into this rating, which is scaled from 50 to 99, which we've used the comparisons before, whether you think of that in terms of your grades in math class in high school, or you think of it in terms of your Madden rating, with a 99 being the best player and 50 being somebody that can't play at all. We put it into that scale just so that you don't have to be thinking, okay, 9 total points per 2 games is a good amount of total. No. We did all that work for you. You can just look into it right there, and you can see Jalen Mayfield with the 99 total points rating in those 2 games in 2020, up from his 89 rating in 2019. There we can get a pretty good idea of how good the player was amongst college football. So that's all that it is. Puts it into a little bit of a rate basis for you, but it's super duper convenient for the reader, especially in this year amongst all years.
Borrowing essentially from the plus family of stats that you see in other sports as well. All right, close things out. The SIS rookie grading system. What are the most important things that readers should know about when understanding draft grades?
If there's one thing that people come away with and they say, okay, I like this stuff, I'm going to buy the book. Understand that we're not going to give you a grade of 100 for a first rounder and 90 for a second rounder. It's not going to be anything like that where it's round based. It's going to be role based. But the key touch points to know are, if a guy is a 7.0 or above, that 7.0 grade, that's an all pro level player. This is a guy that is going to come in year 1 and be a difference maker for his team. Only a handful of those guys in the book. That 6.7 to 6.9 grade range, this is what we call the yellow grade range. This is where we have plus starters, guys that are elevating your team, that are the reasons why you win games on the NFL level. That's a tough grade to get to. If you see guys with the 6.8, 6.9 grades, those really translate to first round grades almost every year. But the 6.7 is kind of going to be that first round to second round type of fringe player based on the way that we grade things and the way that generally shakes out with the way things come down on the board. Then you get to the 6.2 to 6.6 range. These are more circumstantial starters. Maybe they're starting for you and they're not ideal. Maybe they're ideal on first and second down, but not on third down, or vice versa. These kind of are filling out your roster. And then below that, we talk about developmental grades, then backup grades and practice squad grades. And I remind you, all of these grades, except for when we give that all pro level grade, are what they're going to be the first game of year 2. So for all the people that are out there that want to become evaluators or want to understand the way that NFL teams look at that, these are some really key things to understand. Get out of thinking about things in terms of rounds, get comfortable with thinking about projecting what they're going to be their second season. And then you can sort of start to understand the grades. The key thing is not the rankings. It can be very tempting to think in terms of rounds and rankings as a fan, but you need to think in terms of team building as a team. And that's what our scale allows you to do.
That was fun. Thanks, Matt. You can catch us again in 2 weeks. We're hoping to have a special guest for you, so for some more draft talk. You can find Matt on Twitter at Matt Mano. You can find us on Twitter at sportsinfo_SIS. The Football Rookie Handbook is on sale now. You can get it at actosports.com and check out the Kindle version at Amazon. 700-page book, 300-plus players ranked. And hey, it's opening day for baseball, so check out the Sports Info Solutions baseball podcast as well. For Matt Manocherian and our producer Justin Stein, I'm Mark Simon. Thank you for listening to the Off the Charts Football Podcast.